Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Post-Military Podcast, where we share stories of veterans' transition out of the military and their advice to other service members based on their life experience. Whether you are still in service, a veteran, or just someone preparing to transition into a new chapter of your life, there is something here for you to learn. I've included timestamps in the description of the episode, so head down there to see if there are any topics that are of particular interest to you. Also, while you're poking around, subscribing to the channel or podcast on your favorite platform is always greatly appreciated. Anyway, thank you so much for being here today, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
I can still see you. You're not frozen yet, so I think we're good to go. And hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast, the podcast where we give you stories and advice on moving into the next chapter of your life, specifically focusing on military members. With me today is someone I'm very excited to talk to. Not only did he graduate from the greatest school in the United States, the United States Air Force Academy, which is significantly better than any other military academy that we have in this country. He also served in the greatest branch of the military, the United States Air Force. Anyone who says differently is just jealous. After serving 6 years as a contracting officer for the United States Air Force, he decided to get out and has worked in real estate for his entire career thus far. He currently owns his own business called WeVetts, where he helps individuals acquire houses utilizing the VA loan. He also provides educational services on YouTube and via classes to veterans and military members on how they can access their benefits that are provided to them through service. So that person is Evan Kaufman. Evan, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to talk to you. I wish I knew you when I bought this house, but I didn't. So hopefully
a couple years ago, right? And it was a good time.
Yeah, no, it was, I got in right before the interest rates started going up. So it was definitely a good time to buy. We'll see how that goes in like 2 years when I have to sell or rent or whatever, but we'll see. But Evan, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's late over there in Kansas, so thank you for making time to tell your story and give advice to all the listeners out there.
Happy to do it, man. Thank you very much, Billy, for having me on and all that you're doing as well for just helping guys transition and understand it, because it's definitely a wild ride. It's something that I think when we're in, we want to do it. But a lot of us will think, hey, that's like the grass is always greener. But then when you get out, it depends, right? I thought it was definitely greener in some respects. It's not always the same. Mm-hmm. So I just always assume it's always greener. And that's why I love what you do. You help open up and get people to really see that things can be different. Not just always better. For sure.
Yeah, man. Also, I really like your background. For everyone who's watching, he's got the WeVetts background in the back, the WeVetts logo in the background. So there you go. Are you in your office, like the actual WeVetts office right now?
It's our actual studio space. So if you see like our YouTube channel, and then we've had a lot of webinars that we've had. We've gone on 3 years for USAFA for hundreds of cadets, and West Point, we've done 2 years now. And this is the studio where we shoot all that. So
that's awesome.
We got that set up and see it on YouTube channel videos that we're finally bringing out that we've used for years. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
And for everybody who is listening or watching, if you go to the description of this video, whether you're on YouTube or Spotify, I'm not actually sure if the links replicate over to the other podcasting platforms, but if you're on YouTube, if you're on Spotify, Evan's YouTube channel and website are linked down in the description. So after the episode, if you like what he's putting out, be sure to go check him out. We'll plug that at the end too, but I just want to make sure that's up front. First question for you. When you went to go teach at West Point, did you just feel like dirty? Did you feel just like morally superior? Or...
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. It's actually so WeVetts two separate businesses. We've got home loans that I run, and we've got Realty, the original that we had built, helping connect military with real estate agents, right? I do loans for everyone everywhere, but connecting with agents. And on that side, we got a gentleman. He's a West Point grad. He's actually Kansas, living nearby here. I've absolutely loved growing a relationship with him. And he was from West Point and was actually the TAC, kind of like one of their AOCs. Like, helping run the squadrons there. And that's what helped us get in the door there a couple of years ago. So while you say, hey, did it feel odd or anything else? No, not at all. And we do them all virtually again from the studio here. And the whole deal was this last year we had a competition, and it was who had the most cadets show up. And we got 102 that registered Mustafa. And then for West Point, Jason's his name, the old West Point grad that's on the realty side. And he ended up at about 80 or 90 right before the show. And the whole deal was the other guy had to wear the jersey when we played the Air Force Army game a few weeks ago now. Deal is he makes phone calls, hammers it all before, and we tied 102 to 102. So good news, there were 204 cadets between both academies last year, which is awesome. This year, I think there's a good chance we can break that further, but just one of those deals. So yeah, while it's definitely a rivalry and it's fun, I mean, I've enjoyed working for Army just the same.
That's awesome. It really sucks that we got our butts handed to us in that. Listen, that was horrible. So bad.
That's it. Anyone ever wants to look for it, those big double checks I got behind me, we host a tailgate there at the Air Force, whatever academy they're playing each year. So Navy last year, wonderful. Army this year, one of the best experiences, right? We have around 80 to 100 folks come. It's a blast. But then, of course, this year, it was too good to be true. Wonderful day. And then that game.
That was, yeah. Hope I'm sure the tailgate was good.
Yeah, our Army clients out of the tailgate, everything, and get Jason. They were happy as could be, and I can at least live through someone else's happiness.
Hey,
sometime.
That's good. Well, I want to dive in. Tell everybody about your time in the military and then what eventually brought you to your transition point out of the Air Force.
Cool. So real basic. I mean, graduated out of the academy in 2013, really enjoyed it, played football there, economics degree. Ended up getting stationed out in Dayton, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I was a contracting officer. Really enjoyed my time in. So I tell folks, some want to get out because they don't like it or something. They say, hey, the experience is rough. I truly enjoyed it. So really liked being in, working with the folks that I got to work for and with, and had a lot of fun. But immediately when I'd gotten out there to Dayton, I'd bought my first place right away. And it was that scenario where it was me and one of my best friends from the academy. He was going out there for AFIT. I was going for a full assignment, and he was going there for school. We thought, cool, let's room together. My idea was, let's get the cheapest apartment so we can save our BAH and I can start investing. And in his mind, it was, hey, let's get the nicest place we can get with our BAHs. So we settled on, I'll buy the house, he'd rent. So it was the first house hacking, right? And so I was right out the gate. So I actually got my first house under contract immediately after graduation. Now, there's some deals for after graduating for some of the stipulations like a VA loans and stuff. So I had to make sure I waited long enough, but it was on 60 days. I still remember faxing papers when I was over in Europe, doing some traveling over that 60-day period. And that I was still pre everything on your phone. So I remember I was printing off papers and actually writing it, taking photos of it, sending them back to my loan officer at the time. And we closed on that deal right when I got there after 60 days. So that was the start of it all. So I was doing real estate while I was in the Air Force there, loved doing contracting while in, and then I would end up buying a house. Ended up getting into apartments, fixing those apartments up, and I would fix those up at night. So I'd be on base all day and then go off base at night to whatever 4 unit I just bought and was fixing up, and ended up doing that. And then a buddy or two would ask me, hey, can you help me do it? This was back, I always joke and say, this was back 2013, 14, 15, when I had to convince people real estate was good. I mean, some very close people to me told me I was nuts, I was dumb, I was crazy. 2008-9, right? We're still in the aftermath. Some people assume 2008-9 was the worst time. Really, for most areas, especially Midwest states, it didn't hit hard until 2010, 11, and even 12. So 2010, 11 were rough times. And so we were just coming off of that. So real estate was still like a toxic asset. Now I joke, though, and it's, my goodness, back then I had to pull teeth, convince people to show them good returns on real estate. But now all of a sudden, it's like, I know there's an issue when my nephew says, hey, I want to be a mortgage loan officer. I want to be a real estate broker. I'm like, when did real estate broker become sexy? I didn't know that. So I've seen the whole swing, right? Seen that whole cycle, which is interesting. So the start of my time, it was just different. And I was buying up places while in, really enjoyed it. Had some good friends that I would just get to work for. And so I was selling a lot of homes and a lot of investment properties while I was getting ready to get closer to getting out. And then it came down to essentially, hey, are you going to PCS or are you going to get out? And so for my wife and I, we ended up deciding, you know what, it's time to get out and let's push our businesses further while we can. So WeVet had been born a little bit before getting out. I was helping buddies just get connected when PCSing back from, I mean, as early as when I got my license, 2014, right after graduating pretty much. And after connecting a few guys with folks, one of my best friends, the same guy I actually got that house with, he was PCSing to Colorado Springs and just said, hey, can you show me how to buy a house? I made a presentation. We went over it. And then he just asked, can you find me you there? And I realized, oh, there's probably a business in that, right? Because connecting agents with clients, there's a business in that through referral fees and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'll connect you. And that's kind of where the WeVet idea was born. And then we were fortunate. We had some early other founders that were with us, and they really helped us also start up. Good old Sarah, Gordon, Sean, and Sam, can always thank them for helping kick things off. And anyways, we started building the business there 2017. My wife stepped out of her work and we had a crazy time. So Billy's was for that transition. We knew it was time to get out because the businesses had grown. Essentially my selling that we had and the rentals were doing well. But then my wife, she saw it and said, hey, I will step out to go build that real estate connection service that we had. I'll step out of my business, which for the time she was doing really well with marketing. So she was running a marketing team for a large ad agency and said, I'll step out and do that. So 2017, man, we got married in October. She left her job in November. I had dropped my paperwork to get out of the Air Force, which fortunately I had a long time. I dropped my paperwork and had nearly a year because I thought it was PCS and it didn't. And then they were like, hey, cool, you have extra time. So it was almost a year time. But all those dropped. And then we found out we were pregnant in January. So it was like so many things all in a quick swing. It was a pretty wild run. Or I guess a few months later than that for the pregnancy run. But it was all in one swing, right? And so we had about a year there before getting out to get everything consolidated and made the step out, man. And it was really good.
That's awesome. That's it. Okay. Lots to get into. And I really like that. Were you I don't even know what the right way to say this. Were you inclined to real estate before you had gotten into like the academy and then graduated? Like was that a discovered passion when you got your first house, or did you kind of always know that was something you were into?
That's a great question, man. I would say some of the seeds were playing it early. So when I was in high school, before going to the academy, I had a landscaping company and had an employee. We had a blast from best friends and we had a good time doing a lot of yards. And actually we got fortunate and landed a contract, which ironically later on, I'm writing these government contracts. There's a contract with HUD, Housing Urban Development, to manage the foreclosed homes in North Wichita. And this is where me at that time I was 18 because I was a little bit older. So I was like 18, junior in high school. And I got that contract because that's when I learned that branding was smart. You had to have nice looking stuff. They saw my card versus the other lawn mowing guys and they liked my card. So they called, said, hey, do you got an insurance policy for, a million million aggregate 500 occurrence or whatever? I had no clue what that meant. And I was like, oh, of course don't worry. We'll get that. Don't worry. Called up my old guy, Dan, who now I get to see since we moved back home and get us to have lunch with him every now and then. Set us up, good old day. But anyways, got that contract and that was managing those foreclosed homes. So in high school, I was managing those homes, which it was really like we'd cut the yard, go in, do checklist items, and I watched it balloon. So this was 2000. I think I got that contract in 2008, late mid 7, somewhere in like that. That's when I was working it out. And I think we got it 8 and then 2009. And so I remember watching it. Originally, it was only like 5 or 10 homes a week. Then all of a sudden it ballooned to 15, 20. And by the end, it was 40 homes that we were dealing with at the time. And like now looking back, that was just such a pivotal time for real estate. That's when everything was blowing up. 8, 9, 10, 11. I still remember the guys that had those contracts. Here's the funny thing. The name of the company that had that contract with HUD, Pyramid Real Estate Services. What a wonderful name, right? Pyramid Real Estate Services. I still got some of the contract stuff from it now. It's just so, but I still remember them like, hey, Evan, we got all these homes and we got to get them prepped for foreclosure. You ever want to take a look at these to buy them? Yeah, let us know. And that's when the wheels started turning a little bit. But raised well by my mother and father, love them to death. Mom made sure she's like, you're going to school And I was like, yes, ma'am, I'm going to school, and I wanted to play football and I wanted to serve. So off to the academy. And so that got back burner. But one of my teachers at the academy, old Colonel Tewksbury, big shout out to him. Still remember junior year, he'd said, hey, everyone, we're at first day of class. We're going to talk about XYZ behavioral science, but I'll let everyone out 10 minutes early, or you can stay and learn how to become a millionaire. And I just was like, cool. I think everyone's going to stay. I was the only dude that stuck around, Billy, in that class. So, well, I know, great mentor then. But then what did he do? He showed the basics on the board of how he had purchased a property at each PCS wisely. Not every PCS, because as we can gladly get into it, like we're big believers that you shouldn't necessarily buy everywhere. That's one of the things everyone gets hawked and told, hey, you got to. It's not always the best case. We have a general rule that we recommend for it we can talk about. But point was, where it makes sense, purchase and rent it out. And then his whole deal was he ended up buying 4 or 5 properties as he was PCS in his career, sold them all, 1031 exchanged it down to a nice place in Texas, and on you go. And I was like, that's not half bad idea. So that really kind of drove the impetus, plus when I was younger. And yeah, when I got commissioned right away, I knew that I was looking to buy something then if I can make it work.
And when you were approaching that like moment where you could either PCS or get out, was there any like doubt for you on what stay in the military or get out? Because it sounds like you really knew what you wanted to do, but you also sound like you had a pretty okay time in the military. And so what was that like for you mentally to have kind of not bad options either way, because you were clearly making the real estate stuff work, and you were also in the military. So what was that like for you leading up to it?
Good question. Take me back. Here we go for that. So, I mean, at that time, and I look back at that decision making, I was very fortunate in that I was already building outside and was really lucky with that, with the business partners, with the rentals, with everything else that we had that was going, which was good. So that kind of gave me an odd way to get a jump start. And I did the 6-month skill bridge program. That was incredible. I was very fortunate to get the full 6 months, right? I was one of the first folks out of Right Pat to get it cleared and to go do the whole thing. And part of that was just because I had that extra time, because we thought I was PCSing and the PCS didn't work out. They ended up changing the orders. And so we dropped paperwork and said, all right, we'll call it good. And they gave me the time for it. And my commander, wonderful at the time, just absolute great guy, and made sure we could do it. So for me though, getting out, I knew that the hardship, of course, would be, as we always say, the connections. But I was pretty fortunate that knowing that my clientele was almost entirely military. So that's a big plus. So I knew I'd still have that. But one thing I didn't see quite as well, sometimes, even though I had a relative sense of direction and purpose with the businesses, but it still can whack you and not quite know that. So for me, the big driver really was, I love being in, but getting out, it was, okay, I knew it was time for me to go pursue more business, because I had known going into the academy, that's where I ultimately saw myself wanting to be, growing a business. And then, I mean, just personal for me is I love my family. I love kids. We got 4 now, because we got one's on the way here. So we're going to have 4 at 4 years old. Our daughter will be 4, and then 2, and then 1, and then 0. So, and I love that. So it's just one of those deals that we decided, hey, we got to grow that family how we both envision, my wife and I. Shannon, we was like, all right, we got to make that move, and I can do the business, grow the family. That was really that, man. But once getting out, which I know we're going to hit on, it's probably some of your questions for it, is it's always a mental roller coaster, right? It's always a mental roller coaster.
We will get into that. The next question that I wanted to ask you about that moment in time, though, was I think that for a lot of people getting out, it's a very hectic time, because like all of a sudden people are like planning for all these things, and it's like, got to figure out my job, got to figure out what I'm going to do next, got to figure out where we're going to move, this whole hit list of items. And you were a little more unique, and you knew what your job was going to be, you knew what you were going to do, like but then you have all these other things with it. What was it like for you managing, I guess, what was it like for you managing that chaos in the last year of your military? in the last year of your time in the service, and reflecting on that, what do you think you did well in that last year, and what do you think you could have done better in that last year?
Great question. So for me, it really was like that year, especially since I had my paperwork, knew that it was going to be a lot earlier, sooner than later. Because the original deal that was, we had orders San Diego, got rerouted to Shreveport because that person dropped their paperwork. It was a one deep slot. Always learn, be careful getting one deep slot places. And they were like, okay, hey, we're gonna call it because we just decided that Shreveport next place just weren't the spot for us. So we had quite a long time. And I'd say one of the good things that we did. So my wife Shannon, I mean, I give half just the glory honor for her sake because she really helps keep me together. But we really were able to plan then for that year. So it's like we knew. So if you know, and folks are listening to this because I know it's a lot of folks transitioning, you have time on your hands, or I should say, you're getting out in 6, 12, 24 months. Start prepping for that. So we really then buckled down. We were living off of one salary, making sure we could paid everything off that we can. So we knew we were getting in that right position. So that's one of the things I think that we did really well, plotted for that. The biggest fear I had is that when you get out and you're going self-employed, which is what I knew I was going all out self-employed. There's a lot of nuances. Like you watch our YouTube channel, we're about to roll it out. I've just done 3 different presentations for skill bridge groups. That's on the military to civilian transition and buying a home, essentially that whole process. Remember, I'm real estate focused, but hey, there's a whole nother bag of considerations you got to have. Pays are treated differently, how income's done. It's not your simple LES guaranteed government paycheck. That changes all of how that's done. For me, the big fear was insurance. And sure enough, man, insurance has never let me down. By golly, getting out and when you're on your own. Now we're a little bit bigger, fortunately. So we got a company policy that I like to think is better, but then I look at it on the P&L each month of what it costs for the company. I'm like, sweet goodness, it's still not. So insurance, if you're like, oh, I only pay $100 a month, man, I bet your employer's paid a lot more than that on the backside. But point is, that did not let me down at all. In the moment that I brought our daughter, when we had her and I was out, and we brought her because she had just a birth defect, and we brought her to the hospital, got it checked out, and I'm like, good, we're all right. And then I get a bill later because they said they'd take my insurance, and I learned, wait, it's not always the same. And then we get a massive bill. So things like that were a little off. The thing, though, I wish most that I would have done a little better in that last year, of course, it's the connections with everybody. You're so focused sometimes on the next steps getting out that you just forget that, man, this is the last time you're going to be as easily around all these guys and gals that are like you, that you're in the same kind of deal, all in one mission, going the same route. And that's something that, man, I wish I would have taken a little more time to soak that in, because sometimes we're so excited for what's next, and it can be wonderful. I know for my side, it's been wonderful. But we can forget that, golly, that group of folks, don't overlook it before you're getting out.
I completely agree with that. And it's funny, like, I had that realization when I graduated from the Air Force Academy. And then for whatever reason, I didn't even I thought about that like a month ago. I was like, that's happened to me twice now. And I didn't even apply the two. Yeah. Anyway, so for you, you get out, finish your time, drop your papers, you're out. What happens next? Do you stay in Ohio? Where do you go from there? What's that like?
So we did stay. We stayed for a while. We had WeVetts. We had another company that we were helping for military travelers. And then we had our rentals, and I was selling real estate. Guys, like four different deals all going at once, and loved it. So it was that whole ecosystem was there and was rolling, and we decided to stay. So I got out at the end of 2018 there, and we didn't move back to Kansas until in December 2020, really started 21 was our main move. So we had a good amount of time there for it, which was wonderful. Enjoyed it a lot. So it allowed me just to go all in on what we were kind of still already starting to do before getting out. And yeah, just going at it. And that was good time in life. My wife and I, not our daughter wasn't born quite yet. So we had a little bit of time there, which was really good because she came right after I was getting out. So that's why I was all together in one swing, as I was saying earlier. But it was a really good time for that. I definitely still had some struggles. Like I said there, it's that going off on your own then and taking on everything, the insurance, all that good kind of stuff, clearing up. But it was a really good time in life.
Cool. And where in Ohio did you live? Like actually?
So Dayton, Ohio, where Wright Pat Air Force Base is, I bounced around quite a bit. So I actually originally, when we got there, I had lived and been around as Fairborn,
Yep.
Beaver Creek,
Hmm.
Huber Heights, Kettering. Those are all the spots that I was.
Yeah.
And then of course I was in all the neighborhoods when we were selling or investing, flipping, doing something with the place.
Yeah.
So over, but yeah, those 4 areas. I lived in a lot of different spots because then I would buy a 4 unit, live in the unit, and get another guy, fix it up, and
Hmm.
keep going. So that was all over.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of great places there.
No, I grew up in Xenia. So
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Dude, they
yeah.
built all the bike paths, man.
Yeah,
Bike
dude.
paths.
Bike paths are sweet. I love that. Yellow's my wife and my wife's trying to get stationed at Wright Pat next to go be an instructor for flight nursing. And we were talking about where we would live if she got stationed there. And I kind of want to I would love to buy a house in Yellow Springs. I liked Yellow Springs a
Yeah,
lot. It's a
yeah.
fun little
Good
hippie
place.
town, but
They
we'll
sell
see.
down. I remember right.
I'll give you a call if we're going down
Man.
to that neck of the woods.
Done plenty of deals right down there. Love it.
So
Love it.
while you're in Ohio, you're focusing in on your businesses, your family's coming, you're having your kids, all this stuff like that.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's a really dope situation, honestly. Like it sounds like you get out and you're basically winning constantly. So what was it like? What was that mental transition like for you going from Evan the high schooler to a military academy to the military, and then like now you have to be an adult outside of the military? What was that? Was it as easy for you from an identity perspective as it was from just like a life perspective? What
Yeah.
Talk me through that.
Yeah. I mean, I'd definitely say every next step seemed to get a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, all of a sudden a little more responsibility, right? As you well know, academy to then getting out, all of a sudden, man, hey, you're paid well, you get a little more flexibility, you're leading folks, and then getting out, it's running the company. You do got full flexibility of things. But so that was all I really enjoyed, getting those progressive, like I should say, increases in responsibility, etc. But that's where, like, for my life, just going, it was, I've always seen things, I would say things have constantly always gotten better. But then things hit real hard in 2020. It kind of started a hair earlier, I'd say 2019. One of our businesses got walloped by basic command related decision deal that happened. And that was tough, but it caused me to plow into another business. It worked out really well, but it was one of those deals where, hey, you had to deal with that struggle. And then a family member, one of my sisters, ended up getting terminal cancer. So like that kind of stuff starts hitting you. And that's when the move back for home started. And so for me, like what we talked about before for being on here, my transition out, things went relatively well in a lot of different ways. But then when it really hit was the two and a half years later. And then all of a sudden it was, wow, where am I really at? I'm spending so much time focused on us building what we had there for Ohio. But then back home, my family's very close with my family. I love my family. And when like that happened with my sister at the time, it was like, my wife looked at me and she was like, it's time to go. And then that caused a lot of stress and struggle between our businesses and what we had. And it just made you realize, wow, when you make that transition and it's pretty abrupt, it was tough. And that's when all of a sudden I was pulled away from the military community that I had there in Ohio, even after getting out, because it's still just such a military heavy place, to Wichita, where there's a lot less military influence. We have McConnell. I was literally last night, just brought in as an honorary wing commander with actually an 070 Suffolk guy, really cool dude. So I'm excited for that, to get a serve a wing. And ironically, I think I'll have a more Air Force experience than I probably did at Wright Pat, which is where it's like the inverse, right? It was me and a few military and like 80 civilians. And here it's 80 military and a few civilians. So it's cool. But that was probably the hardest thing. And that's what brought us together talking about it. Like where it hit me hard, that transition, was actually as we left Ohio, even a couple years after getting out of the military. And then it was a big, man, who am I? Classic John quote from, Les Mis or whatnot. Who am I? And that was tough. I knew we came back for the right decisions, but then it was a complete restart. Like, it was a complete restart. Brokerage, everything done. We still got the rentals and stuff done, we were able to bring WeVet with us for a bit, but it was a time, man. So 2020, as we say, one of the heaviest years. And that's where I really started to realize I missed that military connection and started working to get that back.
That's really interesting.
Like I say, right up and then a whop and then back.
Interesting. I mean, that's so cool. I mean, it's just a fascinating story because so many people are like, you think, oh, right after I get out, that's when I'm going to have if I'm going to have problems, that's where I'm going to find them. And then you find out later that's not the case. And so for you, how did you, when you started, you moved back, and how did you start realizing that you were going through something, and what did you then do to start, I guess, moving in a positive direction?
Great question. Well, number one, something was wrong because I was actually getting in really good shape for a bit there. I was like, yeah, it's working out a lot. Because at that time, right when we had moved back to Kansas, it was I took pretty much 7 months off, and it was company was running fine that we had. I had let everything else go in Ohio. It was a quick, abrupt deal. And I took about 7 months off, spent it with my family, as much time as I could with Emily and everything that I could for it. And that was it, 7 months. And I got in shape. But then I realized, man, guy just can't quit working at this time. So I knew I had to get moving again. But in the moment for us, I go to church. Well, pastor had a really good line of how in our minds we drive grooves, and our minds are very careful. All before we moved back to Kansas, I didn't realize how fragile our minds can really be. And so all of a sudden I had such a quick, abrupt change there over a few month period coming back, and then just the time off, the time with family, the losses, there were a few close losses, which was really tough that year. And all of a sudden my mind, the negativity could just run its own paths. And before I knew it, my mind was looping on things that were negative and not how I've always been in my life, which is pretty much positive things. That was a tough one. And so it literally, it's been a long time to work to get that out. And it's not really until the last year that's changed quite a bit. I had another son, it's grown, time heals some things, but working on making sure that you train your mind to get back to running and, like I say, the right grooves, because we can get stuck looping on things. So that was really my struggle. I'd say it took a good year to year and a half, and there's still times where your mind can revert back to things and you got to get it back on track.
I think that's great advice. And I think that the fact that you can, like, that understanding that it does take time. I think that one of the things that I hear a lot from people who get out of the military is like, people want to have like the 95-yard touchdown pass of like mental health, like recoveries versus, and no one wants to do 3 yards in a cloud of dust, like advancement through these kinds of battles, but that's generally what's required. And I think that for a lot of people, that's that concept is hard to grasp, because no one wants to just sit and be like, I'm sad. And like I didn't feel as sad today, and viewing that as a win versus just being like, I'm sad forever. I think that's a tough pill for people to swallow, but it's cool that you talk about it, because I think that's it's such an important concept to grasp when we talk about moving on from difficult events or things that have like hurt us in the past.
No, that's spot on. That's spot on. It took getting to a point for it that, hey, my family members I lost, they're not coming back. One of my good best friends died, not coming back. And it's like, all right, that's past, and I'm beating myself up for not moving forward right. And it's just making sure that then you get to a point where you got to either realize, and I think this is a break point where folks either just end up kind of in misery in that negative constant track, or you realize no one outside is really going to change it for you. You just got to get up and you got to start thinking as positive as you can. There's always going to be negative that still comes around, but you got to try to grasp control of that as best you can and change it. And for me, lean heavily on faith, my wife, for that kind of stuff. Makes a big impact, but find something that you can help change that back to being positive And now, fortunately, I'm finding myself back in the old routine where the ruts I run are pretty consistently positive versus negative. So every now and then you hop back off that track, but something that's important, man. And it's real.
Yeah,
Very
two
real.
things that you said that I really love. The first one, I think it's really funny. Once you're out of it, it sounds ridiculous. And if someone who's listening to this have never heard it, it might sound ridiculous, but it's so true. Like getting mad at yourself for not being better faster is such a like when you're outside of that, it's such a it sounds like a ridiculous concept, but when you're in it, it's so true where you're just like, why didn't I get this right? And then you get mad at yourself. It's like this like crazy self-licking ice cream cone of like anger, and then you're sad, and then you get angry because you're sad, and then that makes you like, and it's a tough place to be.
You're all of a sudden running it constantly.
Exactly.
Get your mind out of that groove.
Yeah.
Wagon wheels. Picture those wagon wheels running over a trail. And then ultimately, where wagon wheels end up riding 3-4 inches in the ground and they can't deviate. The problem with our minds, we can keep running those tracks so much. And the question is, like, I know I had to get to a point where I asked myself, just as a man, it was, hey, when things are really good, you're positive and about yourself. But the question is, who are you when it does get tougher and it's rough? And so, like, the one thing that I work on for it now is I want to be a good man, a good father, a good person, a good believer, everything, all that together while I am in a rough situation. So that ideally, when I'm in a good situation, I know that I'm not just happy and positive because things are going well, but it's because that's who I am as a person, right? And I heard that kind of pitch at some point somewhere, and I was like, good Lord, that is exactly, I got to figure this out. Got to work through this, right? So that's where that rut, that mindset, who am I again? Like, what am I really going to be? And that's what I drive at. Is it every day, right? Heck no. Half the time. Still
Not
the
at
darn wagon's hopping on the wrong rut that you
Uh-huh.
get. But it's getting better and better. And you know what? Even if we're not doing better with whatever we're working on at that moment, that's okay, because I know I'm still the person that I want to need to be.
Yeah, and I think that the other piece that you brought up there that I think is really powerful and that I really want people to key in on is the grounding your identity in things that are much more consistent versus things that are inconsistent. Like if you ground your identity in a singular item, or your mental health improvement, or your business, or whatever, like those are things that they're not in your control really at all. And so if people attach their identity to things that are not only out of their control, but have high fluctuation day in and day out, it's going to affect how you view yourself as a person. But if you choose to ground your identity in things like, I'm also a Christian, so in my mind, it's like if I'm a Christ follower first, then I'm a good husband, like then I'm someone who's loved by my family. Like those two things, if those are my foundation, those don't change. Like Christ doesn't change. Wife probably gonna be she's gonna be the same for a really long time. But those are hopefully cross your fingers. But those are things that persist through chapters of life, and those will give you consistency where other items don't, including the military or your other job. Like those end at some point. And so I love that you talk about, I'm a happy, positive guy regardless of what's happening to me today. I think is such a powerful thing to say, and I really love that that's what you're bringing up. So
just wish I would have heard you say that back to me again, Billy, like 2-3 years ago. Right?
That's why we're having the episode, so people can hear it now.
Yeah, that's what I loved about your show, and for the guys that I at least know who have listened and led me on, is that it's having some of that discussion beforehand. And I guess from my side, it really is that in like the discussion we had for all this was, hey, be ready. Something getting out of the military and everything, it might not hit you right away. For some folks, it definitely hits right away, and that's real. But I would argue a lot of it can come and seep in 3-4 years later, start seeing that difference. And a lot of it comes down to how much you really shift, how quick you shift where you're at and what you're doing. But be ready for it maybe to hit you later than you expect. And so you want to get your mind right to just be as ready as possible.
Yeah.
So
I completely agree. I
Love that
completely agree, man. So now you're doing great, or we're on the upswing.
Mhm.
And what I want to talk to you about now is, in your business, you interact with a lot of veterans or people who are getting out of the military. And something I'm interested in, the first thing I want to ask you, actually, we'll dive into veteran stuff later. For you, what advice would you give to people on starting their own business? Because you've been in it now for a while, and it's very much like the military is hyper structured.
Yeah.
Business is completely freeform.
Yeah.
Complete opposite. What advice would you give to folks who might be considering diving into the world of entrepreneurship when they get out? Yes.
When they get out, work through your idea. And one of the best ones is talk with other people to pitch that idea. One of the things that I see the most that folks getting out and to go on their own is not always taking into account maybe the realistic picture of the financial piece of business and what it takes. And this is the product, service, whatever I'm trying to do. Is it really viable or not? So that sounds like the cold, hard Scrooge answer to it, but spend time really working on that. I know the few folks right now who just decided, hey, I'm going to get out, I'm done, and I'm going to start building like whatever the podcast, a couple of them are like news related things. I'm like, great, but what's the plan? Are you thinking, do you have, how long of runway do you have? How much have you saved up to make that work? What's the game plan for getting it to work and monetize well enough to support you? Just thinking that through from a business perspective. And you want to have a good, not necessarily full business plan, but essentially plan in your mind of how you can see it being economically feasible. One of the biggest issues that I just have with guys getting out and doing the rough analysis of is it smart to get out or not is just miscalculating the needed income that they have for getting out. So if you're in the Air Force and you're mid-range officer or enlisted in your sergeant level and stuff, it feels like you might be making very little while you're in, but sometimes we don't account for. And on the numbers, like your tax returns, you're like, man, Evan, I'm only making $30,000. And I'm like, how do you think we're approving you for like a stupid high house? It's because you have non-taxable incomes, you don't pay insurance, all that kind of stuff. So you got to want to really account for all that because it's usually a lot more than what you think. And going through those steps, working with a lot of people, I see, hey, you might think I only need 100,000 or I need 60,000 when I'm getting out. And really, it might need to be a little higher. So if you're a business and you're trying to start your business, make sure that you have the economics there that can make that work and prepare for yourself. Save up. If you're married, boy, make sure you and your wife or your husband are on that same page. That is critical. The person that you're with is the most important thing. I'm just so fortunate. My wife, she's half the reason we have what we got. She's made those things work and run, right? She's the brains behind it all, making it look just wonderful for the marketing and everything. You want to make sure you're on the same page for that. Because if you're not, that could be setting yourself up for a harsh reality, especially when you combine miscalculating economics and miscalculating your house and how that relationship works. That could be real tough.
Yeah.
So having those
Might have
conversations.
a bad time. Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen it. And I only say it because I've seen it. And what's wonderful about the business we have now is I get to work for a lot of folks that are making that transition. And we just talk about what that looks like. What can that mean for you? Right. And like those basics that we hinted at there earlier, the big ones of the pay changes. Hey, Evan, man, I'm getting out. I got this job, cool tech job. Oh, wonderful. What's it paying? Oh, it's paying me hundreds of thousands a year. And then we're like, great, that's awesome. But let's go through it. Well, half of that stock options. How does that really impact your ability to buy that house you want? So we got to go over those things. So you just want to start thinking that through, fleshing it out. And so I'd always say good business planning. If you want to go buy a home or invest, You want to talk with a lender to see how is this change me getting out going to affect me. You want to work with real estate professionals, financial advisors to know, hey, what would my picture look like getting out? And I think a lot of folks just don't do that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that when people get out of the military, we tend to hyper focus on a very small number of items, like getting your VA paperwork done, which I don't even think a lot of people really focus
It's
on
a lot.
that.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
of people are just like, job, right?
And you
Resume, get
And
job.
you assume that I'll have time once I'm out because it'll be less busy. That's probably one of the biggest like pointers for when getting out. Get that taken care of. And if it's ever if any bonus to it, so many folks tell me, well, I can't get it done beforehand, like I can't, or there's no benefit. Well, if you're going to be buying a home getting out, you can actually get your VA funding fee waived if you file your claim before getting out. It's huge. A lot of folks assume they just can't do it, or they got to try to ask for some refund once they're out, and it doesn't work. Or plenty of lenders tell them you just can't do it till you're out. Not the case. You can get it waived before getting out. You just got to file that claim enough time, work with someone who gets it. We can file the paperwork to get it waived. That helps guys save a lot on their next home. So, yeah, little things like that. Those are things that I think are missed quite a bit.
I completely agree. Now, going one step deeper, what's your advice for people who might want to get into, not buy, but get into real estate as a business, getting out of the military?
As a business, like
Yes.
like real estate agent, loan officer, or investing kind of stuff.
Yep.
Number one, like rose-colored glass. Like, again, going back to that concept, my nephew thinks it's sexy to be a real estate broker or a loan officer, and he's in high school at the time. I'm like, something's off. So take the rose-colored glasses off. And again, kind of like starting a business, because when you're going to do these professions, this is what you're doing. Be realistic with it. Do the numbers really make sense for me? What do I really got to do? Like, especially if you're going into real estate sales, or for my sake, like you're going to be a mortgage loan officer originator to go do work, you got to make sure, all right, do I have the marketing plan right for it? Everything's set out or not? So you got to be realistic with it. Property investment, that's always the big one, of course. That's like the majority. So I'd say that's really where most folks are always thinking, hey, do I want to start investing in real estate? I think it's absolutely wonderful to invest in real estate. But so many folks, there's so many different companies, business out there that try to make it sound so passive. They'll say it's all passive income, right? Different things, act this, but it's all passive. Not the case. I will flip those words around. It's not passive and active. It's passive active income that you really have to deal with. So while some of it is passive, it's active to it. So like I still spend 3 to 5 hours a month on all our rentals, even though they're managed out, they're pretty darn well-oiled machines and it works well, but I still have to spend time. There was a time last year where I felt like it was a part-time job. We were going through some transitional stuff with management. And so it is really, and I guess I should rephrase that, it's active passive income is what it really is. You have to be involved. So just know that up front. And you got to really ask yourself, do I want to be a landlord and own stuff or not? I think a lot of folks got to do a little more soul searching on that than what a lot of folks just assume. And so that's me. Sometimes I'm told I'm the sober guy in the room for real estate, because I'm not always like, it's great, it's everything under the sun you thought. I've created the units, some, you get all of it. Great question. So that kind of leads into really, hey, those decisions, how do we really help folks through that? So one of the major things that we have is we say it's our timing recommendation. So you want to ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, will I own this home as a rental for the long run? So if you plan on PCS into an area and you're like, hey, I want to be a landlord. I want to invest in this. I'm going to hold this for a long time. And maybe I'm going to rent it out because I know I'm coming back. I want to live in it again. All right. That's great. If you're going to plan on being there and keeping it for the long run, usually consider renting. You'll watch my buy versus rent videos and stuff we put out. We don't say buy, we say consider, because there's other things you need to take into account. But most likely it's a good decision to buy. But if you're like, hey, I don't want to have that as a rental long term, which I know in reality, working with hundreds, now over 1,000 military families, like that's not the majority of people. You ask yourself, number two, am I going to be there at least 3 years? Very simple. Am I going to be there at least 3 years? If you're going to be there less than 3 years, this is where it's like, oh no, the lender's actually telling me to rent. Yeah, I'm telling you to consider renting. Like it might be better to actually rent the darn place. This is where we're a little unique. Most folks, if you're working with a lender agent in a specific city, it's binary. You're either buying or you're not buying. For us, I like to say, okay, I want to sound altruistic and say we want the best decision for you, but our incentives are relatively aligned. Why? Because if we mess up this PCS and you get crammed into a place that's not optimal for buying, then we just lost your next 3 PCSs. We have folks now with us on their 4th PCS that we're working for. So we don't want to mess that chain up. So there's times where we recognize, hey, maybe don't buy because it might not set you up for the next time that you're going forward. So that timing recommendation, the heavy deal there is at least 3 years. And the reason why it's 3 years is because that's that break-even point where if you purchase a home and you put little or no money into it, ideally with a little appreciation, not a lot, the last 3 years, man, it's been nuts, right? It's covered up so many people's mistakes, it's not even funny. But remember, when I started, that was not that way. 3 years, things are relatively flat or a slight increase. But 3 years is kind of where you start to cover your costs. And that ideally, if you have to sell, you ideally are going to be at least break even. But ideally, you're even longer than that. So that's why I say 3 is the minimum. Ideally, 4, 5, 7 years that you're going to have there. But 3 is that magic number where it starts to make a little bit more sense buying versus renting.
That makes a lot of sense. And in Evan's opinion, where do you think we're at right now in real estate? Like you were talking about how you've seen a whole cycle. Where do you think, are you think we're cycling back around? Like I know everyone's always, you ask one person, they're like, the bottom's going to fall out of this real estate game any second now. And then other people are like, it's leveling off. And so I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
The biggest thing for real estate, every boom bust, you got to look heavily at the supply and demand. Back at the academy, I was an economics guy. One of the beautiful things about real estate is it is a very pure supply demand. So if there are more homes for sale than there are buyers, then ultimately you're going to see prices generally go down. If there's more buyers than sellers, you're generally going to see prices go up. A lot of folks assume it's all interest rate driven. Interest rates, in my opinion, are an indirect cause of prices and changes in real estate, not a direct cause. And a lot of folks right now are like, hey, rates are so high, prices have to come down. But do we forget that rates were historically, literally for our entire country, historically low from 2011 through 18. And we did not see prices skyrocket like we did the last little bit. So rates aren't perfect. Supply demand, though, is very indicative of what happens with home prices. In reality right now, the past year and a half, Billy, from 2020 to 2003 or 23 here, we have had a housing crisis. There has been a massive blow up in the business of real estate. Sales for purchases are down around 30+%, depending on the area you're in the country. Mortgage world is obliterated. If there were 100 mortgages done back in 2021 and early 2022, there's only about 30 to 40 done today. You decimated the industry. Those industries, both of them have been decimated, really beat up. So real estate agents and mortgage companies, they're really feeling that pain. We're very fortunate that we have a very consistent client base that continues to move. Knock on wood, we want our guys to keep getting new experiences in PCS, right? But it's real. So that's blown up. And some agents and mortgages are even like, why hasn't everything come down? It's because it's supply and demand. While yes, there are fewer buyers with higher rates, there have also been significantly fewer sellers. So in my opinion, we're going to be what I've been saying for 2 years now. The world is getting stickier. Things just move a little bit tougher. A house might set for longer, and they are in areas, but that doesn't mean it's going to sell for a whole lot less because there's still enough buying demand that keeps that moving. So it's a weird world that we're in. The only way we're going to see prices go down, in some areas, we're seeing some of that. But the only really reason we're going to see prices ever sharply go down is if supply dramatically increases. Because right now there's still so many folks that want to buy. Now, interest rates help drive down that buyer demand. But what we've learned in the last year is that also softens sellers. Because now all of a sudden, you tell me, Billy, do you want to sell that house you're in?
Right now, no, I don't want to sell right now.
You want me to show you the difference between having that 2% mortgage or 3% mortgage and a 5, 6, 7? Like, that's where folks are like, wait, I can't do that. So then they stay and we have fewer sellers, but there's still, there's fewer buyers. Do you get what I mean? So that's also sticky, and that's actually caused prices to stay even. And in some areas go up. Some are seeing some slight soften, but it's a weird market. So for me, I'm paying attention to that supply. I think over the next year here, there's a potential for some softening in that supply. Doesn't necessarily mean prices go down, but ideally, I'm hoping at least, we end up with a little more normalized market. That would be absolutely wonderful. So I'm thinking that we're just going to have a little bit more of that. You look at transactions and everything, we're more how we were back in the mid 2010s in that range. So a little bit, it's getting to be calmer to a degree, but that's where I'm at, man. Where do I think it's going? It's sticky, and you got to watch the supply and demand. And I don't have a perfect forecast for that.
That makes sense. Switching gears a little bit. So when you are helping people get out, or you're helping people buy these houses as they're preparing to get out of the military, you've got a lot of material on what you should consider when you're buying a house, when you're getting out of the service. I think that all of that. So I don't want you to reiterate that here. If you're listening to this, go watch Evan's stuff. That's going to be the place to go. Give WeVetts YouTube channel some love. But when you are working with people, what other things have you seen folks struggle with as they're going through their transition that's not related to real estate that's like notable to you?
Definitely. The questions I'm answering often, number one, we've touched on a few times now. It's that realization of the economics of getting out, income realization. Like, hey, is it really what I thought it was or wasn't? Man, I was making 70 while I was in the military, and I took this job for 100,000, but I feel like I'm making less money. You actually are. It's like, well, so you are when you do the math, when you adjust for the tax-free stuff, the insurance and all. That's a big one. That's a big financial thing that I'm dealing with for folks. Otherwise, when it's transitioning, people who are still in and transitioning it out, it's usually still, hey, they're on that excitement of, oh, I'm getting out. I'm excited for what's next, what's new. The folks that I'm working with that are out for 6 months to a year, sometimes that's where you can tell. Either it's going pretty well, or that's where you can just sense some of that, hey, man, I'm missing like the camaraderie, the group of people stuff. So you start sensing some of that. So at those times, it's oftentimes conversations. And yeah, sometimes it is tough. I think it's tough being out now and completely on your own and having those discussions. So I'd say those are really the two major things. I'm a pretty big guy on finances, so it's going over the realization of how much what can get you. But sometimes we also recommend, like I always recognize, you shouldn't just do it by money. Like if you're making more outside, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. Like for us, it was also getting out because we knew for us, we wanted to raise our kids next to our family, all that kind of stuff. I would trade making less money to have that experience, right? Yeah, I'd say those are the two major things that definitely do with folks. Finances, and then later on, once they're out, it's sometimes I just had a lot of those talks about, hey, struggling of direction, all that kind of stuff, what we can find. So WeVet broadly try to give you some of that. Like, hey, you're working with a company that has this background for military. That's what we support. We love and we give and we back as much for our clients who are doing their businesses and stuff as well. Like we integrate company that just makes cookies, past client. We use their cookies that we ship to everybody. Cutting boards, same thing from vet. Just love doing that stuff.
That's awesome. Going a little bit more into that camaraderie piece, how have you found success in fostering community, and what do you think veterans can do in order to foster community outside of the military once they get out?
Good question. For me, for coming back, when I was in Ohio and got out at Wright Pat, it was perfectly fine. I mean, I had my connections. One of my best friends, he was also out. We were loving it, having a good time. A few of my other close friends all there. And then just the clients, right? I was selling 60 to 80 properties a year, and it was almost all military in Dayton. And so I just had a lot of those folks. But moving back here to Kansas, I mean, that was almost entirely gone. So one of the things I had, especially because a lot of guys get out and they move back home and they want to get away. You want to get away from that military time, right? And I understand that. But then all of a sudden it starts seeping in like, wait, I'm missing something. So that's where I would recommend, hey, from the military camaraderie piece, embrace all the branches. Like, you got to embrace them. I joke and I'm like, I'm running around with a bunch of West Point guys now. It's like, but we don't have a whole lot of USAFA guys around here, right? And Air Force in general. Yeah, we got our base now that we're more involved in, which has been really good for us. But that was really big, embracing that. Just some of the other guys, some of the Army vets and the Navy vet that I know here, and really just getting along with that and understanding that shared level. Oh, we just had a blast. And I thank those guys so much for giving me a good basis and foundation for moving back here. For non-military, though, that was, for me, definitely a shift because folks don't always quite think the same. It's one of the reasons why we have plowed so much back into WeVetts home loans, because I'm like, man, I love doing stuff here locally, developing and selling and working real estate stuff here, but just working with military guys like you and me, we all instantly connect, right? We connected right away. Like, dang, I missed that, because when you're talking with your other guys from the military, you can have that connection. There's an 80-90% chance we gonna click. Civilian outside, it's sometimes like 20-30%. You just don't quite know. I don't know what it is. So, but you got to join those groups to push and do that. And there's a few groups here that were really good. Rotary for me was actually wonderful recently. We have a good incubator hub deal here that's wonderful called Groover Labs. Got very involved with them and worked for a lot of those folks as an agent and financial stuff and whatnot, and got to get to know folks there. Know that there are some of those civic groups that you can go be a part of. They can give you some of that. It's going to be different, but they can give you some of that. Get involved with them as best you can and be open to doing it. That was important. I was too isolated for 6 months when we moved back. Man, the family's just the ripping away from Ohio, the family stuff. It was tough. I wish I would have started sooner on some of those local groups getting involved.
Yeah, and I think that anytime you can give yourself an opportunity to give back in some way, I know, like you in your business, like you are serving that veteran or that military community, so you get some of that in your business, but doing it in other ways, I think, is so important for the mindset of someone who was in the military, because we're so service oriented, that it's just very important for us to have that outlet of like pouring our cup out and not just getting poured into, I think is very important, but also something that veterans struggle to do sometimes because we're just like, I got out of the military, time to chill or whatever. And we tend to self-isolate if we're not careful. And I think that's pretty scary if you're not careful.
Is that what you
about
feel
it.
you see the most too? Talking with so many different guys who are transitioning, self-isolating.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like
Because I mean, going back to what you just said was like, when you're used to clicking with people and your hit rate's like 90%, and then you get out and if you're not around a military base, you're not hanging out with other veterans, like that hit rate, like you said, it goes down to like 20-30%. And unless you're a just aggressively social person like I am, you'll try and talk to a couple people and you'll be like, whoa, like that's not cool. Like, I don't like talking to you at all. And then it also, I think there's a piece where it's like there's just not that shared connection, but then also there's no shared experience. And it's like, we're so used to, I think the classic example is like, if you're around a bunch of Air Force pilots, they'll tell you that they're pilots without you ever having to ask, because that's all they talk about in a group setting is like planes. Yeah. And so I think that we in the military, we're the same way, just about the military. And so we don't have that shared experience to like talk to some regular person about it. And so then you have no way to connect. And I think that learning to talk about yourself and learning how to interact with non-military people in a way that is like, I don't say normal because we're all normal, but that's not military centric is really difficult. So people just choose not to. And then they just self isolate because they don't want to try and break through that communications barrier almost.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think
I
you're
don't know.
spot on with that.
Yeah.
You see that struggle. Now, you, of course, working for what you're doing, it's almost all outside, right?
100%. Yep. I have a couple of friends that are in the company that are veterans, and so like I cherish those friendships because I need to go talk to them to like level set myself to understand what's actually going on. But that, yeah, it's definitely it's a challenge to learn how to just be Billy minus the military for sure. So I can definitely see the struggle.
Going back to who am I, though,
Yeah,
right? So I
exactly.
think that is, so you bring up a great point there, though, where it's recognizing, I'd say, for whatever it is from this discussion to take, it's really recognize that it can hit you later than you think. And we think, hey, it's getting out. That's where all the hard time is. It can also hit you later. But the number two, it's so important what we've had from the military, but also, does it fully define you or not? Who are you? Who are you really? And so it's making sure that with or without the military, how can I make sure I get to a point where me, Billy, I'm comfortable as I am in the military, out of the military, things are going well, not well. What are really the core features? And that's something that I think can be a hard one for us to always to come to grips with. But trying to make sure you're happy, and I should say happy, more like fulfilled and comfortable with where you are, wherever you're at.
I agree with that. So last question I want to pose to you before we cut out is what is the final piece of advice that you want to leave the listeners with? And you can think about this for as long as you want. I literally can cut all of the downtime.
I would think the whole thing.
Yeah.
20 minutes.
You can take 20 minutes to think about it. I'll make it look like 20 seconds.
No, it's pretty good. Like, dang, that guy thought about it quick.
Yeah, he had that on deck.
Only the one thing that if we could to leave someone with, that's like, especially for transitioning out. Man, I know mine, especially for this type of talk. Then the real thing is if you're getting out, the one thing I should leave away with is how delicate your mind can really be. And while we're in, maybe, and especially in the military, you get it fortified pretty darn well. You have a routine, you have a lot of consistency, but know that mind can be really delicate, especially if you're praised throughout all that time. I was good. I got the firewall 5s. I got the top OPRs, EPRs, all that good stuff consistently. Be ready. Your mind's extremely delicate, and you want to treat it that way. I wish I could go back and tell myself that and stress it. Hey, your mind, it's running right now. Those wagon wheels have been really good and your ruts are deep, but be ready for when it gets to be a struggle. And you got to ask yourself, hey, what is it that really makes me me? And so just know your mind's extremely delicate. Take care of it. That's the one big piece of advice I'd give.
I think that's great. I think it's great advice. I'm going to actually one more question that I want to ask you based off what you just said. Do you think if I could send you back in a time machine to see the Evan of yesteryear, what do you think you could have told yourself to actually believe what you're saying right now?
What could I have told myself to believe?
Do you think you could have actually convinced yourself?
Those twins ones. Could I have convinced myself? Holy cow, dude, that's a good question. What? How would I convince younger me to do it other than like smacking myself or something like that? Like, dude, trust me, this is it. Oh man. Oh God.
You can also say you don't think you could, because I don't know if I could have, honestly.
The real question in that is that the whole point of it? Like, would you know? Like, a part of the journey is that you're figuring that out. Would I get it? Would I just go, oh yeah, man? And that's what I could have said. If you would have told me that when I was young, I'd be like, okay, yeah, of course. I know it's good. But I might say the question that I never quite asked myself. I think the question could potentially be, the question for that would probably be, Evan, do you think, I would ask myself, do you think things are
Mm-hmm.
going really well right now because of circumstances that you have control over or don't have control over? Do you think you're doing
Mm.
really well because that's you as a person or because that's how
Mm-hmm.
things have been going for you? If things are bad, do you
Mm.
think you will still have the same outlook? That's why I wish I could
Mm.
ask myself that. And that's what hit me relatively hard when I started getting into the hard slumps, the losses, everything in
Mm-hmm.
early 2020. That's when it really was just looking at myself going, whoa, am I me
Mm.
because things go well? Or am I me because I know what I'm doing and I can control my life? That would have
Mm.
helped.
Good.
Probably a coin flip if I would have listened to myself, but
That's a good
I'd say
question, though.
that could help.
That's powerful, man. I love that. I love that. That's a really good question to end on. I think that everyone can take that and
Just saying that.
ponder
That's
over
like
that quite a bit.
that's like Marty McFly in the Go Back to the Future, or whatever, and all those shows where you gotta like, how do I know it's you? How do I
Uh-huh.
know the part? Dude, that was a killer question that I'm gonna be
Thank
thinking
you.
more on.
Thank
How
you.
would I? How would
Yeah.
you convince yourself? How would you? That's what.
Because like if
How
you
would you
ever
convince
came
yourself from doing something stupid when you were young? It's
Yeah.
a tough one.
Yeah, exactly. Because if we ever came up with the answer for that question, like I think you cracked the code. Like, oh, I can just make somebody believe me immediately. Like if you literally have the silver bullet where you can just be like, "Pachow," and they're like, "Oh my god, I'm a changed human." Like that's the greatest piece of psychological information ever. Like quit real
Yeah.
estate, sell that. like that's
Yeah,
the
that's
but
exactly
we're
right. Hey, I love young me. Actually, one of the things I do ask myself when you're hard on yourself now, I look back at young me, and I know that young me would actually be really pleased and proud with where I'm at. And then it hits me of why can't I be proud of where I'm at now, though? I know younger me. I mean, I write goals and I look back at some of those and I'm like, I've blown past those when I was young. Like I thought it was a high bar to make X or get this and build this and have that. And I'm like, now I'm like, holy crap, like we exceeded that well in advance. Why am I still, why am I still thinking more? And it's just because I think that's like a human nature. That's what we have. So I think it's an important one. One of the great things I should say always at the end for its sake, like just trying to, if getting out, going back to the delicate part of the mind is really that like I've come to really believe like for a man, you are what you think about. And man or woman, I should say, but as people, we're us getting out, you are what you constantly think about. So be careful what you're thinking about. That goes back to that delicate mind piece. And so if you're starting to think negatively, it's what you start to become. If you start to tell yourself that you can never get in shape, if you start to tell yourself you can't quite figure it out financially or for family or your kids, then it starts to happen. I just think the most powerful thing really is what's right up here in our control over our minds and how we handle that. Something that I just never fully appreciated until the last couple of years.
That's awesome, man. So much great advice right at the end. I really love it. Evan,
Kicked it
thanks
off.
so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to be tell your story, be vulnerable, and just give so much amazing advice to everyone out there that's listening.
And thank you, Billy. Thanks for pulling it out of me and so many folks that you've had on the show. It's absolutely
Yeah.
incredible. And yeah, pull the shields down and show the scars. What you got to have.
I'm happy that I have amazing guests that are willing to come on and tell their stories for sure. It would be pretty boring. It would be a boring show if people weren't willing to come on and talk about like the wild shit that's happened in their life. So I really am grateful for you and everyone else who's chosen to do that.
Some years are. I'm a pretty calm. I'm a pretty calm one. That's why I noticed. Like I've been very fortunate, very
Yeah.
fortunate. But we all have those struggles in some way, shape, or form. That's for sure.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? Well, thank you again. If anyone out there is interested in learning more about Evan and what he's doing, again, check out the WeVet YouTube channel, check out their website. Both of those are linked down in the description along with Evan's LinkedIn profile. So head down there, show him some love, check out the stuff that he's got. But that is the end of the episode. Thank you all so much for making it to the end. You all are the reason why we do this. And if you like what we're doing, liking, sharing with the people you know who need to hear this, subscribing if you want. But that's it. Can't wait to see y'all on the next episode, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Post Military Podcast. Peace.